Your government has offered me research facilities beyond anything I could have imagined, he said. A full team, unlimited resources. Neri noticed his hesitation. You're concerned about something. Jaiho smiled slightly. I'm worried about losing what made this work in the first place. I succeeded because I had to find creative solutions with limited resources. Sometimes constraints drive innovation. Then we will build appropriate constraints into the research program, Neri said decisively. The facility will have sections with limited resources where new approaches can be tested before moving to full implementation. They watched as one of the newly arrived Telari carefully navigated through the reception, his movements becoming more confident with each step. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you first contacted me? Neri asked. I hope to help one person walk again, Jaiho admitted. Everything beyond that was unexpected. As the reception continued, news agencies across Earth broadcast images of the Telari walking alongside humans. On the Telari homeworld, medical facilities began receiving inquiries from thousands of citizens with mobility impairments, asking how they could join the program on Earth. The Telari Science Council, initially skeptical of human involvement in their medical technology, voted unanimously to expand the research initiative. Plans were already underway to adapt Jaiho's neural interface technology for other applications, sensory restoration, precision control systems, even new forms of communication between different species. That evening, after the diplomatic events concluded, Neri took a walk through Central Park, something impossible just months earlier. The simple pleasure of moving freely through nature, feeling the varied terrain beneath her mechanical feet, brought a deep satisfaction that diplomatic achievements couldn't match. A small girl approached her, wide-eyed with curiosity. Are you really an alien? She asked directly, in the way only children can. Neri smiled. I am a Telari, yes. And those are robot legs, the girl continued, pointing. They are. They help me walk because my own legs were injured. The girl considered this seriously. My grandpa has robot legs too. But yours look cooler. Perhaps someday they will look the same, Neri suggested. Your people and mine are working together now. The girl nodded as if this made perfect sense, then ran back to her waiting parents. Neri watched her go, thinking about how this child would grow up in a world where cooperation between species was normal, expected, where the boundaries between human and alien technology blurred into something new and better than either could create alone. Tomorrow would bring more diplomacy, more technical discussions, more challenges. But tonight, walking under Earth's moon in a park filled with trees, she could now move among freely. Neri allowed herself to simply appreciate how far they had come, one step at a time. That night, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to memories of walking, running, dancing, physical sensations that had faded with time. The Telari doctors had explained that her neural pathways were intact, but the connection between her brain and lower body was severed beyond their ability to repair. They had offered her the hover chair as a permanent solution, a technological marvel that responded to her thoughts and maintained her dignity. But it wasn't the same as having legs that touched the ground. Morning arrived with rain pattering against the embassy windows. Neri prepared herself carefully, choosing formal diplomatic attire that concealed the atrophy of her lower body. Pride was still important to her. Ambassador, your visitor has arrived, announced the security system. Bring him to the garden room, she instructed. Jaiho was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his mid-30s by human standards. He carried a single case and wore simple clothing that showed signs of wear, not the polished corporate representative she had encountered so often. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Ambassador, he said, bowing respectfully. Your persistence deserved acknowledgement, at minimum, Neri replied, gesturing toward a seat across from her hover chair. Jaiho sat down but seemed too energized to stay still. I've been studying mobility issues for 15 years, he explained, opening his case. First with human patients, but since the Telari arrived, I've been fascinated by the physiological differences and similarities between our species, and yet our medical science is far more advanced than yours, Neri observed. Jaiho nodded without offense. In many ways, yes, but sometimes a different perspective can see solutions others miss. Your people approach medicine systematically, with elegant solutions based on centuries of knowledge. But humans, he smiled, we stumble forward, try impossible things, fail repeatedly, and occasionally make breakthroughs no one expected. As he showed her his designs, a neural interface that worked with the Telari nervous system rather than trying to repair it, Neri found herself drawn into his enthusiasm. The technical aspects were innovative, but surprisingly simple. Where Telari medicine had focused on restoring her damaged spine, Juho proposed bypassing it entirely. This could fail, she pointed out. It could, he agreed readily, but it could also work. And after 10 years, isn't that possibility worth exploring? As the rain continued outside, Neri made a decision that would change not just her life, but relations between their species. When can we begin? 1 week after their initial meeting, Neri entered Jaiho's laboratory located in the outskirts of Seoul. The embassy security team had thoroughly scanned the building before allowing her to visit. 2 Telari guards remained outside, clearly uncomfortable with their ambassador entering a human facility alone. Jaiho welcomed her with a respectful bow. Ambassador Neri, thank you for coming. I know this isn't a small decision for you. The lab surprised her. Unlike the pristine, minimalist laboratories on her homeworld, Jaiho's workspace was a fascinating contradiction. Shelves overflowed with components and tools, yet there was clear organization to the chaos. Prototype exoskeletons in various stages of completion hung along one wall. Neural interface components were arranged on workbenches in neat rows. Your facility is unexpected, Neri said, her hover chair gliding smoothly over the polished concrete floor. Jaiho smiled. Most visitors say messy, but I know where everything is. He guided her toward the center of the room, where a holographic display was projecting a Telari skeletal structure. Her skeletal structure, she realized with surprise. Where did you get this data? She asked sharply. From the public medical records your embassy released 5 years ago, Jaiho explained. The basic anatomical information was part of the cultural exchange program. I've been studying it ever since. Neri relaxed slightly. The public records were indeed limited, but still contained basic physiological information. What impressed her was how thoroughly Jaiho had analyzed it. Ambassador Neri, I believe I can help you walk again, Jaiho said, his quiet confidence unwavering despite her skepticism. He activated another display showing a device unlike anything she had seen before. The problem isn't creating mechanical limbs. That's old technology for both our species, he explained. The challenge is creating a neural interface that your body won't reject, that can translate your thought impulses into movement in real time. Neri had heard similar promises from her own medical experts for years. My people have tried neural interfaces. The rejection rate is too high, and the signal delay makes natural movement impossible. That's because they're approaching it from a biological repair perspective, Jaiho said. I'm taking a different path. Instead of trying to repair the biological connection, I'm creating an entirely new pathway, one that works with your existing neural patterns, but doesn't require biological integration. He showed her a thin, flexible material that shimmered under the lights. This is a quantum neural mesh. It doesn't physically connect to your nervous system, but can read the electrical patterns from proximity alone. No rejection because there's no direct connection. Neri's scientific training made her doubtful. That would require extraordinary sensitivity to detect neural signals without direct contact. It does, Jaiho agreed, which is why no one thought it was possible until 3 years ago, when I successfully used it with a human patient who had rejected all conventional interfaces. He pulled up a video showing a human woman walking with a similar exoskeleton. Her movements were smooth, natural. Nothing like the jerky, delayed responses Neri had seen in other mobility devices. She had been paralyzed for 20 years, Jaiho explained. Now she hikes mountains on weekends. For the first time in years, Neri felt a spark of real hope, quickly followed by skepticism. If this technology works so well, why isn't it being widely used? Jaiho's expression became more serious. Because the medical establishment considers it too experimental, too unconventional. They want years of additional testing. Meanwhile, people like you wait. His passion was evident, but not aggressive or desperate, just deeply committed. He led her to a workbench where components for what appeared to be a specialized exoskeleton were laid out. This is the prototype I've been developing specifically for Storie physiology. The leg structure is different from human models to accommodate your different joint configuration. Neri studied the components with growing interest. The design was elegant in its simplicity, yet incorporated solutions to problems her own scientists had deemed insurmountable. The neural mesh would be integrated into this bodysuit, Jaiho continued, showing her a thin, flexible material. You wear it under normal clothing. It reads your natural neural patterns and transmits them to the exoskeleton. With training, your brain will adapt to the new pathway. You'll move the robotic legs as naturally as you once moved your biological ones. What are the risks? Neri asked directly. Jaiho appreciated her directness. Primarily, disappointment. If it doesn't work, you're no worse off physically. There's no surgical intervention, no permanent changes to your body. The system either works for you or it doesn't. And if it works, then you walk again. Not perfectly at first. There's a learning curve as your brain adapts to the new feedback system. But over time, the movements become more natural. My human patients report that eventually, they forget they're using technology at all. Neri's hover chair moved in a slow circle around the workbench as she considered the possibilities. Her government had explicitly warned against trusting human technology with something as precious as her mobility. Storie technological pride was at stake. Yet she had spent 10 years watching humans solve problems with unexpected approaches, 10 years confined to a chair while her own people's solutions remained theoretical. My colleagues think adapting our technology to Storie physiology is impossible, Jaiho added quietly. But they're thinking too conventionally. They see the differences between our species as barriers. I see them as design challenges. Neri studied Jaiho's face carefully, searching for signs of deception or unrealistic ambition. She had become skilled at reading human expressions during her years on Earth. What she saw was neither arrogance nor desperation, just quiet confidence and genuine desire to help. How long would development take? She asked. The basic framework is already designed. Calibration to your specific neural patterns would take 3 weeks. After that, we could begin mobility training immediately. Neri thought of the senior counselor's warnings, of her responsibility as ambassador, of the potential diplomatic implications if this human technology failed, or worse, if it succeeded when Storie medicine had failed. We start tomorrow, she said, her voice firm with new determination. Jaiho smiled. Tomorrow it is. Bring comfortable clothing. We have work to do. As Neri's hover chair carried her out of the laboratory and back to her waiting security team, she realized something had changed. For the first time in 10 years, she was thinking about walking not as a lost past, but as a possible future. The first week of integration brought more challenges than either Neri or Jaiho had anticipated. They established a temporary laboratory in a secure section of the Storie embassy to satisfy the security concerns of Neri's government. Each morning, Neri arrived hoping for progress. Each evening, she left disappointed but determined to continue. The neural patterns are shifting faster than I expected, Jaiho explained on the 8th day, dark circles under his eyes betraying his lack of sleep. He had been working through the night again, analyzing the data from their latest attempt. Your nervous system adapts quickly to external stimuli. It's both a blessing and a challenge. Nari watched as he adjusted microscopic components on the neural mesh. On my world, adaptation is considered a sign of weakness. Systems should be perfect from the beginning. Jaiho looked up from his work with a small smile. No wonder your people and mine approach problems so differently. Humans expect to adapt. We build it into our designs. The mesh suit itself was remarkably light, made from materials that conformed perfectly to Nari's body. When she wore it, sensors recorded the faint neural signals her brain still sent to her legs, even though those signals no longer reached their destination naturally. "Try again," Jaiho said, helping her into the calibration frame where the exoskeleton legs waited. Nari concentrated, focusing her thoughts on the simple command, "Lift right foot." The robotic leg twitched but did not rise. She felt frustration building but pushed it aside. "The signal is stronger than yesterday," Jaiho said, studying the readouts. "But there's interference at junction point 3. He made another adjustment, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon despite his exhaustion. By the end of the second week, Nari could reliably move the right leg on command, but the left remained stubbornly unresponsive. The senior counselor had requested a progress report, and Nari had been honest about the mix. Nari overruled the objection, using her authority as ambassador to continue the project. But the tension remained, particularly when the first images of Nari in the exoskeleton were transmitted back to the homeworld. The response was immediate. A formal request to end the dangerous experiment and return to established Telari medical protocols. "Your people seem uncomfortable with my involvement," Jaiho observed carefully after receiving yet another cold reception from the embassy staff. "They are uncomfortable with anything that challenges their view of humans as technologically inferior," Nari replied honestly. "If you succeed where our doctors failed, it forces a reassessment they are not prepared to make." Despite the diplomatic complications, the work continued. Each failure led to new insights. Each adjustment brought them closer to success. Nari endured discomfort and disappointment through multiple failed attempts, but noticed something her people rarely displayed. Jaiho learned from each failure instead of abandoning his approach. His resilience was as impressive as his technical skills. In Telari culture, failure is seen as evidence that an approach is fundamentally flawed. She told him one evening as they reviewed the day's data, "We abandon failed approaches immediately and start over with completely new methods." Jaiho considered this. That works when you have unlimited resources and time. Humans rarely have either. We have to make do with what we have, improve incrementally, learn from our mistakes. 6 weeks into the project, they had a breakthrough. Jaiho had been experimenting with different feedback mechanisms, trying to give Nari's brain the sensory information it needed to coordinate movement properly. The latest iteration included pressure sensors in the feet of the exoskeleton that transmitted data directly to specific points on Nari's skin. "Your brain needs to know when the foot touches the ground," Jaiho explained. "Without that feedback, coordinated walking is almost impossible." When Nari stood in the newly modified exoskeleton, something felt different immediately. She could sense the floor beneath the robotic feet, not as she once had with her biological legs, but as a new sensation, a gentle pressure against her shoulders where the feedback sensors made contact with her skin. "Try walking," Jaiho encouraged, standing nearby but not touching her. The calibration frame had been replaced with parallel bars similar to those used in human physical therapy. Nari focused on the movements she had practiced for weeks. Shift weight, lift right foot, move forward, place down. Shift weight, lift left foot, move forward, place down. The exoskeleton responded smoothly, translating her thoughts into action with only a fraction of a second's delay. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. She reached the end of the parallel bars and turned, a movement they hadn't yet practiced. The exoskeleton performed the turn gracefully, responding to her intentions rather than specific commands. "It's learning," Jaiho said, unable to hide his excitement. "The neural mesh is adapting to your thought patterns, anticipating commands based on context." By the end of that session, Neri had walked the length of the parallel bars 12 times. The movements were still cautious and deliberate, but unmistakably walking. As Jai-Ho helped her back into her hover chair, still necessary until they were confident in the exoskeleton's reliability, Neri realized something had changed in their relationship. The formal divisions of ambassador and engineer, Tellari and human, had faded. They had become partners in this challenge, each bringing different perspectives, but working toward a common goal. "Tomorrow we try without the parallel bars," she said. Jai-Ho nodded. "Tomorrow you walk freely again, Ambassador." "Neri," she corrected. "I think after 6 weeks of watching me fall repeatedly, you've earned the right to use my name." As she returned to her quarters that evening, Neri composed a message to the senior counselor, including video of her walking with the exoskeleton. She ended the message with words she knew would cause controversy on her homeworld. "The human approach has merit. Perhaps there is more we can learn from them than we have acknowledged." The day of the final test arrived exactly 2 months after Neri had first visited Jai-Ho's laboratory. The embassy's conference room had been cleared of furniture, creating an open space with plenty of room to walk. A small delegation had gathered to witness the demonstration. 3 Tellari officials who had traveled from the homeworld, the embassy's medical officer, and 2 human representatives from South Korea's Ministry of Science and Technology. Neri felt their eyes on her as Jai-Ho helped her into the exoskeleton. The latest version was sleeker than previous prototypes, designed to fit under standard clothing. Only the metallic joints at the knees and ankles revealed its mechanical nature. "The neural interface is now operating at 98% efficiency," Jai-Ho explained to the observers as he made final adjustments. "Response time is down to 12 milliseconds, nearly imperceptible to conscious awareness." The senior Tellari official, Minister Hyun, watched with obvious skepticism. "Our medical community has attempted similar interfaces for years without success. What makes your human approach different?" Jai-Ho answered without looking up from his work. "Your approach is focused on repairing biological pathways. I created an entirely new pathway that works alongside the existing neural architecture." Neri appreciated how Jai-Ho never sounded defensive when explaining his methods. He stated facts without arrogance or apology, a quality rare among both humans and Tellari. "Are you ready?" Jai-Ho asked her quietly. Neri nodded. For this demonstration, she had chosen to wear traditional Tellari formal attire, a flowing silver robe with embedded light patterns that reflected her diplomatic rank. The exoskeleton was barely visible beneath the fabric. Jai-Ho helped her stand, supporting her arms as the robotic legs took her weight. This part was familiar now after weeks of practice, but Neri's heart still raced at the sensation of standing upright, of feeling solid ground beneath her feet. The room fell silent. Even Minister Hyun leaned forward slightly. "I'll walk to the far wall and back," Neri announced, her voice steadied despite her nervousness. She took a first step, then a second. The movements were careful but fluid. The feedback system created the illusion of sensation, pressure, balance, position, allowing her brain to coordinate the movements naturally. Halfway across the room, Jai-Ho quietly released his supportive grip on her arm. Neri continued walking, not immediately noticing she was doing so independently. When she reached the far wall and turned to walk back, she saw Jai-Ho standing several meters behind her. She had walked the second half of the distance completely on her own. A murmur went through the small crowd. The human representatives were smiling. The Tellari officials exchanged glances that mixed surprise with something that looked like concern. Confidence growing, Neri walked back toward the group. Each step became more natural than the last as her brain adapted to the neural interface, fine-tuning her movements in real time. 3 steps from Jai-Ho, her left leg suddenly locked mid-stride. Neri felt herself losing balance, beginning to fall forward. Panic flashed through her mind. To fall now, in front of these witnesses, would undermine everything they had worked for. Jai-Ho moved forward quickly, but didn't grab her. Instead, he spoke calmly, Neural spike detected. Reset pathway 3 and continue. It was a command they had practiced countless times during their training sessions. Neri focused her thoughts on the specific neural pathway, visualizing it clearing and reconnecting as Jiaho had taught her. The leg unlocked instantly, responding to her mental command. She recovered her balance and completed the walk, stopping precisely in front of the delegation. Minister Hyun's expression had changed from skepticism to careful neutrality, which, for a Storie official, was equivalent to astonished approval. "This exceeds preliminary reports," he acknowledged. "The level of integration between neural command and mechanical response is unexpected." The medical officer stepped forward with a scanner, examining the junction points where the exoskeleton connected to the neural mesh. "No signs of rejection or neural strain," she reported, unable to keep surprise from her voice. "Stress indicators are well within safe parameters." One of the human representatives spoke up. "Mr. Kim, would additional functionality be possible with this system? Could the ambassador run, climb stairs, perhaps even dance with further refinement?" Before Jiaho could answer, Neri made a decision. "Let me demonstrate," she said. Without warning, she took a quick sidestep, then another, moving in the pattern of a traditional Storie greeting dance. The movements were tentative at first, but as her confidence grew, so did her grace. The light patterns in her robe responded to her movement, creating trails of luminescence that followed her gestures. For 10 years, she had been unable to perform even the simplest of her culture's movement rituals. Now, imperfectly but unmistakably, she was dancing. When she finished, even the Storie officials broke their formal reserve to acknowledge the achievement. Minister Hyun inclined his head, a gesture of significant respect. "Impressive," he said. "But I must ask about long-term viability. How durable is this system? What maintenance will be required? What if Ambassador Neri returns to the homeworld where human technical support is not available?" Jiaho had anticipated these questions. The system is designed for self-calibration and diagnostics. It will alert the user to any potential issues well before they become problems. As for maintenance, he looked at Neri. "I've been teaching the ambassador everything about the system's operation. She can perform all necessary maintenance herself." Neri nodded. "Jiaho has ensured I understand every component and connection. Additionally, I'm compiling complete technical specifications to share with our medical community, so they can produce compatible components if needed." The delegation asked more technical questions, which Jiaho answered with patient precision. Throughout the discussion, Neri remained standing, experiencing the simple joy of being at eye level with everyone else after years of looking up from her hover chair. When the formal demonstration ended and the delegation departed to prepare their reports, Jiaho and Neri remained in the conference room. "There was one moment when I thought I might fall," Neri admitted. "But you didn't," Jiaho reminded her. "You handled the neural spike perfectly, better than during practice. Having an audience is apparently motivating," she said with a small smile. Jiaho adjusted a connection point near her knee, fine-tuning the response. "Try again," he urged, supporting Neri as the robotic legs responded to her neural commands. "Walk the full length of the room without any resets." This time, her movement was smoother, more confident. The sensation was overwhelming. After 10 years, she felt ground beneath her feet, transferred weight from one leg to another. The feedback system created an illusion so perfect that she could almost believe these were her original legs. Tears formed in her compound eyes as she took 5 steps, then 10, then 20 without assistance or hesitation. Jiho stepped back, giving her this moment of independence. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly when she completed the walk. Neri considered the question. The diplomatic answer would be appreciation, perhaps measured enthusiasm. But the truth was something far more powerful. "It feels like being whole again," she said simply. Unknown to both of them, news of the success transmitted automatically to the Storie homeworld through the embassy's communication system. Senior medical officials and scientists received the data from the demonstration with initial disbelief, followed by urgent calls for verification and analysis. Within hours, the Storie Science Ministry had convened an emergency session. The implications were profound, not just for mobility restoration, but for their understanding of human technological capabilities and the potential for collaboration between their species. As night fell over Seoul, Neri stood by the embassy window, truly stood, not hovering in her chair, and watched the city lights come alive. For the first time in a decade, she was looking forward to tomorrow, not as another day of diplomatic duties, but as a day when she would walk in the morning sunlight. Tomorrow, she said softly to herself, I visit the cherry blossom trees in the park. It was a simple goal, but after 10 years, the simple act of walking beneath trees felt like the greatest freedom imaginable. The United Nations headquarters in New York buzzed with excitement. Today marked the first formal address by a Storie ambassador since first contact 7 years ago. What made this occasion historic wasn't just the diplomatic significance. It was how Ambassador Neri would enter the assembly hall. Camera crews positioned themselves strategically. Human and Storie officials whispered among themselves. The Secretary General checked his notes one final time before the proceedings began. Outside the main entrance, Neri took a deep breath. 3 months of intensive practice had transformed her tentative steps into confident strides. The exoskeleton had been refined repeatedly, now slim enough to be nearly invisible beneath her formal attire. Only a slight mechanical hum revealed its presence. Nervous? Jae-ho asked quietly. He wore formal attire himself, a significant change from the workshop clothes she had grown accustomed to seeing him in. Not about walking, Neri replied. This speech represents a fundamental shift in Storie human relations. Not everyone on my world supports this change. Jae-ho nodded. Change is never easy, for any species. The doors opened. Neri walked forward, her robotic legs moving with a natural grace that belied their mechanical nature. The neural interface had become so responsive that she rarely thought about the commands anymore. Her intentions flowed directly into movement, just as they had before her injury. The assembly fell silent as she appeared, then erupted into thunderous applause. Human delegates rose to their feet. Even the usually reserved Storie representatives stood, their compound eyes glittering with reflected light. Neri walked steadily to the podium, aware of the historical significance of each step. Behind her came Jae-ho, recently appointed as the first human scientific liaison to the Storie government, a position created specifically for him after the success of the exoskeleton project. The Secretary General welcomed them both, his formal words barely containing his evident enthusiasm. Today we witness not just a technological achievement, but a symbol of what cooperation between our worlds can accomplish. When it was Neri's turn to speak, she looked out over the assembled delegates. Cameras transmitted her image across Earth and to her distant homeworld. 10 years ago, I lost the ability to walk, she began simply. Our advanced Storie medical technology could not restore what was lost. For a decade, I represented my people from the confines of a hover chair, a marvel of engineering that nonetheless left me separated from the full experience of the world around me. She gestured to her now functioning legs. These robotic legs were not created by Storie engineers with our centuries of advanced technology. They were designed by one human working with limited resources, but unlimited determination. When our experts said the neural patterns were too complex to interface with mechanical systems, Jae-ho Kim found a way. When our medical community insisted that Storie physiology was incompatible with human bioengineering approaches, he proved them wrong. Neri turned slightly, acknowledging Jae-ho with a respectful nod. Our greatest strength isn't our technology, she continued, addressing the assembly, but our willingness to learn from those we once considered less advanced. The Storie have much to teach humans about space travel, energy systems, and molecular engineering. But humans have equally valuable lessons for us about innovation, adaptation, and seeing possibilities where others see only limitations. As she spoke, the main doors opened again. 5 Telluri entered the chamber, each using variations of the same exoskeleton technology that allowed Neri to walk. Their movements varied. Some walked with visible caution, others with growing confidence, but all moved independently. A murmur spread through the assembly as delegates realized the significance. These were not diplomats or officials. They were ordinary Telluri citizens with various mobility impairments who had arrived on Earth just 1 week earlier, ready to work with the human who had accomplished what their world thought impossible. Today marks the beginning of a new collaboration, Neri continued. The Telluri Science Ministry has established a joint research initiative with Earth's medical community. The first project will focus on mobility restoration, but we envision many others to follow. Jae-ho Kim will lead the human team, working alongside our foremost neural specialists. The announcement triggered another round of applause. Jae-ho looked slightly embarrassed by the attention, but stood tall beside the ambassador. However, technology alone is not enough, Neri said, her voice becoming more solemn. This achievement required something beyond advanced materials or precise engineering. It required trust. I had to trust a human engineer with knowledge of my physiology and nervous system. Jae-ho had to trust that I would give his unconventional methods a fair chance. Our governments had to trust that cooperation would benefit both worlds. She paused, looking directly at the cameras. To those watching on my homeworld who still doubt the wisdom of closer cooperation with humans, I invite you to remember our oldest teaching. Wisdom comes from unexpected sources. For centuries, we believed this referred to the diversity of thought among our own people. Now we understand it encompasses the vast diversity of life throughout the galaxy. After the formal address, a reception allowed delegates to speak directly with Neri and the other Telluri using the exoskeletons. Human medical professionals examined the technology with Jae-ho explaining the key components. Telluri scientists asked detailed questions about the neural interfaces, taking careful notes. Away from the crowds, Neri found a moment alone with Jae-ho near a window overlooking the New York skyline.